Welcome to Unapologetically Sensitive, where you can learn, relate, laugh, and maybe even live a bolder, brighter life. I'm your host, Patricia Young. This is a weekly podcast where we explore the strengths we have because of our sensitivity and some of the challenges it poses as well. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hey there. To the creatives, healers, sensitives, and deep thinkers, welcome. I'm really glad you're here today. By the time you're hearing this, we should well be into spring. So how's your spring going? I think you're really going to enjoy this episode today. I get a little vulnerable at the beginning, right off the bat. And it's interesting, at the end of the episode, I make an observation about what we're talking about. So I don't know, curious to see what you think. Today, I'm talking with Elizabeth Cush, Biz. We're talking about anxiety, and we talk about how Biz got interested in specializing in anxiety. We talk about what is anxiety, how does it show up for people, what are common myths around anxiety. Biz gives some tools that can help for managing anxiety. We talk about lifestyle changes that are helpful for managing anxiety. I just think this is a really great conversation. We also talk a little bit about how anxiety can show up for highly sensitive people. And we didn't really talk about how do you distinguish between like a generalized anxiety disorder and what comes up for highly sensitive people. But we do talk about how anxiety tends to show up for people and some of the things that we do to manage our anxiety. I think it's a great episode. I don't know, would I ever tell you if I thought it was a sucky episode? I will tell you, I have recorded episodes that I really was not pleased with. Went ahead and released them anyways, and they've been some of the most popular episodes. So sometimes what I think isn't great, y'all love, and I don't know, maybe things that I think are great are lukewarm to you. I just put it out there and trust it lands where it's supposed to. I do want to give you a heads up. In the middle of recording with Biz, I got dumped out of my own recording program. Yeah, it's been one of those days. What happens probably around the 35, 40-minute mark is I ask Biz about, is childhood emotional neglect, is that trauma? She starts talking, and then all of a sudden it cuts out. I have gone back in and I said, hey, this is where that thing happens. And then we start back over. But I always like to give you a heads up if there's anything unusual in the episode, just so you're prepared for it. Let me tell you a little bit about Biz. There is a longer bio in the show notes if you want to know all about her. Elizabeth Cush, LCPC, is a licensed clinical professional counselor, business owner, and blogger in Annapolis, Maryland, where she hosts Woman Warriors, a podcast for anxious women. In her private practice, Progression Counseling, she helps men and women who feel overwhelmed, anxious, and stressed out to find more connection with themselves and others, allowing them to live their lives with more ease, intention, and purpose. She's a certified clinical trauma professional. She's an expert contributor for Good Therapy, a guest contributor to the Happily Imperfect blog on Psych Central, and has been quoted in articles for The List, Teen Vogue, Tonic, Best Life, Bustle, ThriveWorks, UpJourney, and The Paper Gown. And now, on to the show. Hey, Biz, welcome.
Hey, well, thanks so much, Patricia. I appreciate your having me on the podcast. And it's always nice to talk to someone that I already know.
I hear you. It's funny. I have a friend. I feel like I probably should not even ask you this, but I'm just in one of those tired moods today.
Yeah.
I have a friend who asks, like, do you get excited about your interviews, or how do you feel before you have an interview? So I have a really an unexpected kind of wrong answer, but so do you want me to, I feel like I should start and model in case you want to, so I don't put you on the spot. Should I start?
Oh, go for it. Yeah. I'd love to hear your answer. Yeah.
I think the way my brain works is I just focus on what's in front of me. And so I often don't think about the interviews that I have coming up because I just focus really well on one thing. Once in a while, I'll be really excited and looking for it. But I feel like I felt like my answer should have been like, yeah, I totally look forward to it and I plan and I think about it. And I just feel like it's totally the wrong answer. How about you?
Yeah, I think I tend not to think about it until it's time. Like I mean, although I do prep work, the week before to know that I'm prepared for the interview, but I try not to think too hard about it because I just like, what am I going to do? Right. I mean, and when it's somebody bigger, I tend to be more anxious than calm about it. So it's better if I'm not thinking it over and over and over, And so, I tend to kind of put it out of my mind until it's time.
Yeah. And I think in that context, it makes sense. But I think because a friend asked me and I felt like I had never thought about that, but the right response is, I get really excited and I think about it. It's like, no, I just kind of do what's in front of me and then I get ready and then I have the interview. So
yeah. And I tend to be more excited afterwards if it was a really good conversation. Like, I'm like, yes, like, oh, that was, easier than I thought, or what a great connection or whatever. But yeah, ahead of time, not so much.
I wonder if that's a healthy coping skill as a highly sensitive person, because we can get really into our heads and the preparation and the planning. And I'm wondering, instead of seeing it as being something deficient with me that I don't get really excited, it's just like, I'm just doing what I need to do to get through so that I can stay focused during the interview. I wonder if there's a better reframe around that.
I think that's a beautiful reframe, right? Like that we're just taking care of ourselves in a way that we know how to. And too much thinking about it would definitely make me anxious.
Yeah. Well, generally my head is full of all kinds of stuff as it is, so it really doesn't really need a lot of extra stuff to add to it.
I get it. Yes,
I know.
Totally.
Biz, do you identify as a highly sensitive person?
I do. And it's interesting. I would say I'm a highly sensitive introvert. So I've always known I was anxious. I've always known that I had some introversion. I was prone to liking spending time alone. But I recently, after different conversations, and really paying more attention to it with my clients, sort of better understanding what being a highly sensitive person is, I took the test, and sure enough, like so many of the sort of markers were things that I was like, oh, okay, I get that. Like, that makes sense. I was always very highly attuned to sound, and I don't know, I always felt like my emotional stuff was like too big for the people in my family. I learned how to be very quiet around that sort of thing. And so there's a lot of components of, my own parents being able to be receptive to emotions at all. But
sure,
definitely I'm learning that I need time to recharge. I need time alone. And, I need space in my life to just pause often.
Yeah. Do you know that's the same for highly sensitive extroverts as well?
That's interesting. Yes. And I know you and I have talked about that a little bit for my podcast, but I think like if I were to, I don't want to call my son out on this, because he doesn't know I'm going to say this about him. But my youngest, I would say he's a highly sensitive extrovert because he loves interaction, loves people, loves that outward, he's very good at being dynamic and outward facing. And yet, he can be easily overwhelmed too.
Yeah, we've got to have our quiet time just as well. And I'm only good for a certain amount of time extroverting, and then I need time to pull back.
Yeah. I think the places I feel it most these days, because I've learned how to kind of take care of myself, but like going to a mall or shopping, like in a very crowded dynamic, if there's music and smells, and I'm just like, okay, I can last here for about 5 minutes and then I got to go.
Although I love people watching if it's not too noisy.
Oh, love people watching.
I don't mind crowds if I can sit and just watch people. It's like people TV to me.
I totally, I'm 100% with you there. I love people watching. And I think if we ever go, when we go to like a concert or something, I'm more interested in the people around me than the music. Although I love that too, because I do love music. But I will have like stories made up about what their lives are, and all the things.
Yeah, my husband and I used to play a game where we'd see a couple and we would talk about them. Oh, that's Mary and John, and this is what John does, and this is what Mary does, and this is what they're struggling with. It was a very fun game.
It sounds really great. And I definitely do that in my own head.
Yeah.
Like I have like these stories made up about the people and do they like each other? And
Yeah. I was thinking as you were talking, at least I recall that I enjoyed people watching over a year ago. I mean, it's been over a year since we've been in this pandemic for a year. So I would assume that I will still enjoy watching people once the pandemic is over and it's safe to go out into the world again. But that was, everything, every marker seems to be before or after the pandemic. Do you find that too?
Yes, definitely. It's really, it's really been a unique year. And although there've been some really great things about it for me, not the pandemic itself and not the virus, but it did give me time to sort of figure out what I need and space for me to do some more in-depth work on myself, which not for the whole pandemic, for parts of it. But so, there's been some writing and just, spending time by myself, which has been okay because my husband and I live together, but, we're married, but we have a separate space where he goes to work every day and I work in the house. And so I've had the house to myself every day with my dog. And it's like, I love this. Yeah.
Interesting. My husband's been working from home. Fortunately, I have my own office and I spend the day in my office when I need to work. But I really enjoy having him in the house and just knowing that he's here. I didn't think I would, and he didn't think I'd like it either. So early on when I said, it's nice having you home, he's like, really? I'm like, yeah, I actually really enjoy it.
Oh, that's nice. That is nice.
Yeah, we haven't killed each other yet.
Yeah, and we were just saying that to each other the other day. It's like, it's a good thing we like each other because I could see how, and I know there are people who are struggling because the problems in the relationship are suddenly now very front and center.
Yeah, and I don't know what's been going on the last couple of days. They've been incredibly irritable. There's been a lot of stressors, but even prior to that, and I totally lost my shirt with my husband over the weekend. And I think the last time I lost my shirt was on Thanksgiving 2019. I recorded a podcast episode about it. I just lost it and kind of said some really unkind things in a parking lot, including the word that rhymes with duck. I mean, I apologize. I always apologize. We talked it through. And then the next day, it happened a couple times in a row. And it's really unusual for me I can be a little like, kind of poking at things. But I don't know. I was just crabby, little Miss Cranky Pants. We worked it through, but yeah. It
was interesting. I heard somebody today I was on a group call and they were saying, they are also a therapist. They were saying this time where we've gotten so used to the pandemic and sort of living this life. And now that things are shifting and there is some sense of hope and change, that can be the harder part of this, like the discomfort around, like, is it changing fast enough? Or I don't know, just that the shift from, like, we've gotten used to being isolated and now there's this potential for things being different can be even harder for us.
Well, and one of the things I was saying is I think I've been so depressed that I haven't had the energy to get irritable, and now that I'm feeling better.
Right.
And I've heard with depression and anxiety that we go into anxiety, which takes a lot of energy. So we go into an anxious phase and then we get exhausted and we go into a depressed phase because we don't have the energy to be anxious. Have you heard anything like that before?
Absolutely. And I think we got used to the depression, and that was just sort of what it was. And now, maybe the anxiety's ramping up and we're noticing that we were really depressed. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah, with the change.
Yeah, it's been a hard year. And for me, the reason why I love talking about this is all feelings are okay. The sad feelings, the lost feelings, the anxious feelings, the cranky feelings, all of it is really okay. And, I don't advocate fighting with your partner saying duck very loud in a parking lot. And, I think every once in a while, it's okay if you lose your shirt, if the relationship can manage the conflict. And my husband and I said, it's been a long time since we've had such a big fight. Both of us were like, yeah, it could have been anything. And so if it's not something if the relationship is strong enough to handle that, I just think it's just part of what happens when we're alive. We have ups and downs and ins and outs, and we just deal with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think really a part of, for me anyway, because I grew up I was a very anxious child and anxious young adult. Part of that anxiety stemmed from not knowing what to do with, handle, express my feelings. And so it would just get pushed aside, pushed down, ignored, and showed up in anxious feelings instead.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of a nice segue. Can you tell us a little bit about how you decided to specialize in anxiety?
Yeah, sure. Well, a lot of the reason is because I am an anxious person, and I know from experience how opening yourself up to the anxiety and being more present with it definitely can shift that relationship versus, like in the past, I would have just been cranky, angry with my children or my spouse, irritable, which is how it often showed up for me. And instead, I learned how to sort of be more open, recognize my feelings, and I knew that path was available to other women who struggled with the same thing. And so it was important in my practice to sort of normalize that, sure, anxiety is there, but how we manage it, how we open ourselves up to it, that can make the difference in terms of it's no longer going to take over your life and drive the bus or whatever. You can put it in the back seat and say, yep, it's going to show up sometime, but it doesn't have to control my life.
Yeah. I think that's one of the benefits of when we have a niche that we've personally experienced and how we show up as therapists is to use appropriate self-disclosure. It can be so validating and normalizing to have a client who's struggling with something who's like, yeah, I get it. I get it.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. And I do. I get it. And it took me a long time to get to a place where I really fully understood sort of the roots of the anxiety for myself. And that's led to me being more open and curious and figuring out ways to hear what those anxious parts of me have to say without getting sucked down that rabbit hole. That's not to say I don't lose nights of sleep because of my anxiety, because I still do, but it's not all the time. And usually I can kind of work back through it and say, okay, I see what was happening for me in that moment.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
What is anxiety? How would you define it?
I think the tech or whatever clinical way to describe it is it's a fear response. We are responding to, our bodies are reacting as if there is imminent danger. So back in the day when we had to stay safe from predators, we needed this sort of anxious state to help us prepare to either fight or flee or freeze. And it's a natural part of who we are as humans, and it's how we survived. But now that we don't have those actual predators, lions and tigers and bears, it's just we respond in the same way, but to much smaller things in our lives. And not to say that there aren't big threats to our lives too, but we can have that same fear response to not getting enough likes on social media or feeling like we're being judged by a friend group or things like that. And so when, and it's both a physical and a mental shift inside, so our bodies are reacting, our brains are telling us this is dangerous. And sometimes it's so deeply held inside, it's almost an unconscious fear that we're just like, oh, I'm just anxious. But usually there is something there that is activated and poking you and feeling scared. Most of the time, that's what it's from, fear. Mm-hmm.
Do you find that most people, if you were going to use a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is you're so anxious you can't sit in your skin and you're probably close to having a panic attack, where do you think most people's level of anxiety is, or is it just all over the place?
I would say, I think it depends on the age of the person. I feel like these days, I don't see middle schoolers or high schoolers, but having raised a couple of, 3 boys. My youngest, who is a lot younger than the older 2, the level of anxiety that was present for the high school students, that at least his friends, but also that I would hear about from other parents, like I feel like these kids live with a much higher level of anxiety all the time. And whether that is because we know so much, we have access to so much information through, online streaming and news and social media, that there's a lot more to be afraid of, even though it's not life or death. It can feel that way as an adolescent.
Yeah.
If I'm being excluded from this friend group, or I don't know, somebody's judging me about some post I made on Instagram, or I don't know what, somebody's sharing a picture that I didn't want shared with all my classmates. I do think there's a lot more fear there. Overall, I would say women probably live with more anxiety than men. At least they talk about it more in session with me, and maybe are more able to identify it as anxiety than my male clients, I would say. Mm-hmm. And so scale of 1 to 10, maybe 7, 8. Yeah.
That's a pretty high level.
Yeah, it is. It is. And day in, day out, if you haven't found a way to help your body and your brain and your mind reset from it, it's possible you're going to bed anxious, not sleeping well, waking up anxious. And so it's just this really vicious cycle, and hard to find peace within it unless you're actively working on it all the time.
What does anxiety look like in people? Can you give some examples? And if at any point you're comfortable sharing about your own experience, people love personal stories, and I want you to honor how much you feel comfortable sharing.
Yeah, well, I would say over the years it's shifted. So as a young child, because I had early childhood trauma, so I was an anxious kid for a long time because that was really never addressed or healed. So as a young child, like nothing, I couldn't get my shoelaces tight enough. My mom would tuck me into bed, and I'd need like the sheets to like hold me so tightly. I probably could have used a weighted blanket, to just help me feel contained. In high school, I think there was more social anxiety, but I think relationship anxiety too. Just, where do I fit in? Where is my tribe? Who are my people? That type of anxiety, not really feeling like I fully fit in. And then later in life, for me, a sense of that same sort of I don't fit in and where are my people, but two, like I will never feel fully whole in myself because this anxiety gets in my way and it makes it hard for me to relate to people. So, yeah. So, and I've been to therapy for a long time now, but in and out of therapy throughout my life. And, some really great therapists and some terrible ones, but that has really helped me. And I would say for my clients, that sense of there's something broken in me, and that sense of not belonging or not ever feeling whole. But it can also look like panic attacks, insomnia, irritable, relationship issues. It can show up in so many parts of our lives, and it can just make life feel so much harder than it needs to be.
How do you feel about your anxiety today?
Pretty darn good, I must say. And I've done a lot of work. But much better. I sleep pretty well at night these days. COVID definitely knocked me off track a little. The pandemic definitely kicked my anxiety into high gear for a period of time, just because there was an imminent threat out there all the time. So just kind of brought back some of that sense of danger. But I've done a lot of work on better understanding how much fear I carried around all the time. And that's hard to look at sometimes, when the fear is just like, I'm afraid just because I'm afraid. Like, this is how I enter the world, as being afraid. Like, that took a lot of self-reflection and insight and therapy to help me work through that.
What are some of the behaviors that people do to manage their anxiety that's not about the anxiety, but people pick up behaviors as a way to manage that are not, and it's not that the behaviors are good or bad, but when it's used to an extreme to manage, it can be problematic.
Well, I think the most common thing that I see is like that we find ways to numb it, right? To not feel it, because the discomfort when we are anxious, especially because most of us have the very physical symptoms too. So, tightness in your chest or your throat, hyperventilating or feeling like your heart is racing, like those can be so, and even just discomfort in your own skin. Like, that was another thing for me with being highly sensitive and anxious, like textures of clothing. If I had a wool sweater on, it would have almost driven me insane because of the scratchiness. But so numbing, not feeling. So it could be substance use or misuse. For some people, it's online shopping, gambling, eating, not eating. These days, social media and scrolling, our phones, or binge watching shows without really being present. All of those behaviors to me speak to, I see that as a way of sort of disappearing from myself. Like, if I don't have to feel these feelings, if I can be somewhere else or have my brain be somewhere else, then I don't have to feel the discomfort.
I think cleaning, exercising, organizing.
Yes. Oh, that too.
And often behavior that can appear to be very controlling as a way to manage. Like, my mom was a single mom. We've done repair work. She was a single parent, not a single mom. We've done repair work. She lives with us, but I joke that the rules had rules, that the way that she managed was, there was just a rule about everything. And there have been a few times in my life when I've been a neat freak and I'm really not fun to be around. And so I'm either, neat and I chase everybody with a rag and something to clean up after them, or I'm just like, whatever. I don't feel like I've been very good at finding a middle ground where I can stay on top of things without being neurotic.
Yeah. But yes, the constant cleaning, and for me, not being able to sit still. I can remember my husband saying, just sit and watch TV. I'd be like, nope, laundry has to be done. Dishwasher has to be emptied. I could not be still with myself. But it's exhausting.
Yeah. What are some common myths around anxiety?
I think one of the things that I try so hard to instill for my clients is that this is a very normal, natural reaction that's just gotten blown out of control. We're not ever going to never be anxious. That's just not going to happen. But, and it's there for a good reason. It is showing us. So, one, that it's not natural, shouldn't be there. I want to, there's a myth of I can live a truly happy, peaceful life and never feel anxious again. Not true. That can't happen. Can we have less anxiety? Sure. Also, there are people who say, it's all in your head. There isn't anything to be anxious about. What do you, and that's a myth too. We do have anxieties. There are things that stress us out and that maybe have deep-seated roots and, how we were raised or the things we've experienced. So it's real and it's not all in our heads.
Yeah. And telling someone to stop worrying, don't be so anxious, there's nothing to worry
Doesn't
about.
help.
Yeah. Is so damaging and incredibly unhelpful.
Yeah. It really is. It really is. I mean, it's basically telling people not to feel, right?
Well, and if it's how you're wired, that the message is that how you're showing up in the world is not okay. And as highly sensitive people, there's a crossover here because we have depth of processing, which is probably the most prominent feature of being a highly sensitive person. We have a more active insula. We see the breadth and the depth of things. And so we are going to chew things over and turn them over and really work at problem solving because that's what we're good at. we come up with solutions to things that don't, and we're great at troubleshooting and forecasting. I always joke, for those of us that are old enough to remember the show Let's Make a Deal, that, Monty
Hall,
whatever is Monty Hall, would come up and, if you had a hard-boiled egg, or if you had stamps, or if you had pennies in your purse, or a Band-Aid, or things like that, like, we're that person that we've got the Band-Aids and the safety pins and the migraine medication and the headache medication. And, when my kids were little, I always had an extra pair of underwear and made sure I had a pacifier and snacks. And so that's not necessarily a bad thing when we look at it as being a strength in how we're wired.
Yes. And to be told, that's too much, or there's something wrong with you for feeling that way, that's where we get wounded.
Right. And we often end up internalizing those messages and then tell it to ourselves. And I've talked about this a lot, that anytime there's a conflict in my life that happens, I really process it over and over and over, because I'm trying to figure it out and work it through. And before I knew I was highly sensitive, I probably would have said I was ruminating. I'm sure people told me I couldn't let things go. I was told I was gossiping. It's like, I just want to look at every single angle until I really understand it. And this is where we really have an advantage, that we understand ourselves and our processes, because we have this innate ability to really examine what goes on with us. Like, we observe ourselves and we observe ourselves observing ourselves. And it is really a strength. If it's not working, then we need to look at that.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, that it can, I think, for some people who maybe have some anxiety as well as the highly sensitive nature, that it can turn into ruminating. Like, yes, if it's not working and we're just repeating these same thoughts and worries over and over again. But yes, I totally think through, oh my gosh, everything, start to finish, my own behaviors, how am I feeling? Where did it come from? I don't know. Yeah. All that.
Yeah, and it's not uncommon that after we have a conversation or a phone call or an interaction, that we walk away and like, did I say too much? Did I not say enough? Was I empathic enough? Was I not, that we do this self-reflection. Right. And again, learning how to moderate that so we don't beat ourselves up, so we feel terrible, and learning how to reassure ourselves so that we can stay in a place where we're mindful without kind of circling the drain.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And mindfulness is huge.
Mindfulness is huge. Why I think it's so important is we can be in it, and once we name what's going on, we're no longer identified with it. If I can go, I'm aware that I'm feeling really anxious right now, that I'm a step removed from the anxiety, because now I'm able to pull back and observe myself. And that's when we can come in with self-compassion and tools and all kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So important. I think probably self-compassion was, I think, one of the keys to unlocking my anxiety, is that we're just so able, it's so easy to criticize ourselves about either being anxious or too sensitive or mistakes or, not being perfect enough. And, learning how to treat myself with the kindness and compassion that I'm so readily able to give to the other people in my life has really just shifted so much internally for me.
Yeah. And I think part of that is a trauma response, when we know how to be present and available and caring for everybody else, but we're not able to do it for ourselves. That's a trauma response. As highly sensitive people, we're very attuned to other people and what they need. And now we're learning more and more about trauma and what I was calling childhood emotional neglect. I'm starting to think that that's trauma, and many of the things that HSP struggle with, I honestly believe are trauma responses. We can change them, but what are your thoughts?
Oh, I would agree. Yeah. I mean, I too identified with being emotionally neglected as a child, and know that had a huge impact on, one, the trauma that I experienced, but two, just how to heal, right? How to be with what happened and love myself anyway, but being able to say, this was trauma, this is what hurt. But as you said, like identifying, like to me, I love to say like, oh,
well, this is where it dumps out. So we'll be picking up in just a second. Just wanted to give you a heads up. Yay. Okay, so we were talking about trauma responses, and I got dumped out of the recording program. Yay.
Technology. We love it.
Not really happy about it, but just going with the flow, because
Yes.
I don't want to get all pissy about it today. I don't even know. You were talking about trauma responses and knowing from your childhood that things were trauma. That's the last thing I recall you saying.
Yeah. So I think what's really helped me, as you said, sort of being able to not identify like, yes, I'm a trauma survivor, but I don't have to be a traumatized person, right? Like it doesn't define me. I have anxiety, but it's a part of me that shows up. There's this anxious part that shows up when I'm not feeling safe in the world or I'm not feeling heard. But that's not all of me. Like that has helped me sort of navigate all the parts. Yeah, there are wounded parts of me, but there's these amazing parts that show up in podcasts and interviews and in my therapy sessions. And, you know, there's a business part of me that wants to develop new products. Like, so there's so many parts of me that, yes, trauma impacted my life, but it also made me the person who I am today.
I totally agree with you. And I love doing internal family systems and parts work and really honoring all of the parts. Something happened this week that was just really frustrating. And I was sharing with somebody that I'm close to processing it. And, you know, I have parts that are really angry and really have very mean thoughts. As an adult, it wouldn't be something I would say to somebody I didn't trust, but really honoring those parts that feel like angry and want people to feel hurt and I don't act on those, but allowing those parts to have a voice and a place is really important. And I think that also relates to anxiety, because if we don't allow the parts of us that feel angry and unjust and not heard, the reverse side of that is fear, feeling like we're powerless and we've got nothing to offer, and allowing those parts to be angry and hurt is really important.
Well, I feel like that takes us back to like where we started with the conversation, that like all feelings are valid, are okay, like all those parts, right? Your angry part. I think for so many of us, we've been programmed that there's good feelings and bad feelings. And so if we're having bad feelings, that makes us a bad person. And that's not true, right? We have all kinds of feelings all the time. And when we're not honoring that we're feeling them, yes, anxiety shows up, depression, you know, for some people, probably more severe, you know, whether it's personality disorders or whatever. If we're shutting down all, you know, big parts of ourselves, we're not living authentically. We're not honoring who we are as a person and everything that's happened to us in our life that creates some of these feelings that show up for us, right?
Right. Well, and if we label feelings as good and bad or positive and negative, we will not ever be able to rumble with conflict or discomfort or things like that, because it is uncomfortable. It's more comfortable to sit in the discomfort and the suffering of feeling angry and resentful in something familiar. If you and I have conflict and I don't know, you've done something that's upset me and this happens repeatedly and I've learned how to at least sit with my resentment, it's uncomfortable and it's suffering, but it's familiar. But if I'm not willing to sit with the discomfort of letting you know that it hurt my feelings or I felt angry and run the risk of you feeling angry with me or you having feelings, then we're never going to resolve it. And every time this happens, I'm either going to go into resentment or I'm going to go into anxiety because I don't know how to deal with it. And if I know all feelings are okay and intense feelings are okay, they're not bad. And when we learn how to sit with that discomfort, the world opens up. And for me, the anxiety reduces. It's still uncomfortable when I have to share scary things with people that are vulnerable. I've learned to sit with it, but the level of intimacy that we can get and the depth that we can go in relationships, and we want that connection. We want to feel seen and heard. But if I'm only giving you a little piece, I'm only going to be seen and heard a little piece. So with that risk also comes the potential for amazing connection.
Oh, so much. Have you ever read the Book of Awakening by Mark Nepo? So it's daily entries. So for every date, you can turn to that, you know, March 9th or today, March 10th, and read his reflection. And, you know, it usually has a little meditation. But yesterday's was just that, right? Like if we show up in the world and share either our displeasure, whatever it is, whatever we're sharing that's uncomfortable or difficult or conflict, we're creating an opportunity for the person that's in our lives that we're sharing this with to show up with that same energy. Where if we're shutting down and closing in on ourselves, we don't ever even give them the opportunity to meet us there. Yeah.
And I guess I want to clarify that the intention for sharing is to build closeness and intimacy. It's not to discharge my own discomfort. That if I was having a rough day and I just wanted to kind of barf on you, all the things that you do that irritate me because I think that's going to make me feel better, that will not build intimacy. That will create distance. And so I want to make that distinction because that's often what happens with anxiety is we can't manage it. So we either tell other people things because then it's like hot potato. I can't sit with the discomfort and I don't want to hold it. So I'm going to throw my uncomfortable
give it at you. Give it to you. Right?
Yeah.
No, absolutely. Yes. It's sharing how we're feeling, not all the injustices we feel, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Can you give us some tools that are helpful for managing anxiety?
Sure. I mentioned a self-compassion practice that is simple but not easy. It's treating ourselves with the kindness and compassion we would treat others. That it does take some practice and effort to do that. I think therapy is really helpful. And also a thing that's really shifted for me is my meditation practice. And I know for people who have anxiety, this can be hard because we have to learn how to sit still with ourselves. And that can be one of the hardest things, but it can help us build tolerance around those difficult feelings. So we learn how to be with them versus fighting against them or ignoring them, or it's just allowing them to be there and hearing what they have to say, but also noting that like everything else, all of our feelings, it shifts, right? We're not always anxious. We're not always afraid. So it builds an awareness of the constant flow, whether it's up and down or in and out, however you want to picture it, of our emotional state and the feelings in our body. Like this won't last forever, which sometimes that's how anxiety feels. Like it's going to be here and never go away.
What are your thoughts about moving meditation?
I love moving meditations. I love movement.
Qigong.
Yeah. And just movement for anxiety because it can help us, it can make us feel stuck, right? When we're feeling super anxious. So just moving your body gently and slowly and yoga can be a beautiful thing. Dancing, really releasing the energy, jumping around. For me, exercise has been really helpful too, just as a release. And I think you just have to find those things that really speak to you. My mindfulness practice has been super helpful. Being able to find the women in my life who really know me and accept me and honor that, I may show up anxious, I may show up in all different forms, but they still love me and want me in their lives. And that's pretty amazing too.
Yeah, I think having at least one relationship where we really feel seen and heard, and if we have one or two people that really understand us in that sense of belonging and community where people go like, yeah, I get it. I'm right there with you. Man, that is so validating and normalizing because, I don't know about you. I think I have this belief, like I'm 57 years old. I'm a therapist. I quote, should know all this stuff. And like being a human is messy and things come up and I stumble and if it's something new, I kind of go through this, this is really hard. And when I tell somebody I care about, a therapist friend, and they go like, yeah, I'm right there with you. I'm struggling with some of the same things. Man, it is so validating. I don't know why there's still this belief that I shouldn't struggle with things or that things shouldn't be hard. Sometimes I don't have that, but oftentimes just to have somebody validate it, I'm just like, it's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay. I just have to be present with it.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I think as therapists, I think we do hold this sort of higher, like we should have this all figured out. And like you said, we're human. Like we struggle too. And to be okay with that. And yes, have the people in your life be like, yeah, no wonder. Or whatever.
What I'm really coming to believe is that those of us that are willing to continue to do the hard work and rumble with the discomfort, we are such a gift to our clients. And I'll tell you, I've seen therapists that are really good therapists with their clients, but when it comes to conflict and personal relationships, they haven't done the work. And I'm trying to be mindful about how much I want to say about this because I want to be respectful, but we have got to be willing to do our own work and to rumble with our own discomfort and to do the things that we tell our clients to do, to be better human beings, to be good therapists. And there are some amazing therapists out there that when it comes to personal conflict in their life, they kind of suck at it. We go into this, I think, because we're wounded and we want to heal, and we learn how to be healers for others, but we don't always do the work that we need to do. And it takes a lot of courage and guts to rumble with your own stuff.
Definitely. Definitely. I am right there with you. Yeah. It's hard work and important, and knowing your I don't want to say weaknesses because I don't like to look at it that way, but knowing where the work still needs to happen is important.
Yeah. It's where we have wounding. And we usually come by our wounding very honestly. It's not bad that we have wounding and we need to work on it. I paid for a session with somebody last week to work on some attachment wounds that were coming up in a personal relationship. And I found myself very reactive in that thing of I didn't hear from you for 4 days, so I'm not going to get back to you for 4 days because I want you, it's like I have some attachment wounds. And in this week, about 3 things happened that activated some of the same attachment wounds. Mm-hmm. I needed to get some work done. And it was so nice working with someone who said, I get it. I hear where you're at. And I could talk about those young, angry parts of I want you to hurt just the way I'm hurting. Doesn't mean I acted out on it, but those parts need to be heard. Mm-hmm. We got to do our work.
We do.
Yeah.
It's important.
Yeah.
It's good stuff.
Are there lifestyle changes that we can make that are helpful for managing anxiety?
Yeah. I think good sleep habits, really, really important. If we're not, there's a lot that goes into that, because if you're anxious all the time, that makes sleep difficult, which makes then you feel anxious the next day. But supporting yourself and creating sort of nightly routines and good habits around sleep are really, really, really important. Gives your body a chance to reset. I think eating healthy, whatever that means to you. For me, it's, I love candy and sugar. And so for me, it's not eating a whole lot of that. I love it. I will buy good chocolate, but I don't have to. I used to just eat any old kind of junky candy all the time. Not good for my mental state. Drinking less, for some people it's abstinence. For some people it's being mindful of how much alcohol they drink, because that can definitely impact your anxiety for sure. Exercise has really helped me. I know for some people that can be a slippery slope, too much exercise or using the exercise as a way to disconnect. But I think walking in nature, giving your body a chance to move helps move through some of those difficult feelings too, the physical stuff. So,
yeah. And I would have had it having, at least one person that gets you, supports you. If that's a therapist, if it's a partner, if it's a friend, if you have pets, that's something else can be really helpful.
Definitely.
I think this last year has really allowed us to see how slowing down, that many of us were going at a pace that may not be sustainable. Mm-hmm. I think when we can create a schedule that works for us, a lifestyle that works for us, I know that's not always possible, but those things also really make a difference. Having time for relaxation, for play, for things that are really enjoyable and fulfilling.
Yeah. Yes. Joy. And laughter. But having those people that we feel connected to and safe with, really, really important.
And there is a gut-brain connection. I mean, it's interesting that there's a fast food place that my husband likes to go to that I don't really care for. But by the end of my workday last night, I was so exhausted that I couldn't even think of where to pick up food that would work for me. And I'll tell you, I did not sleep as well last night. I woke up feeling more anxious. And I know that when I eat the foods that are in this fast food, it messes with my gut biome, which impacts my mental health and my sense of well-being. I do it. And during COVID, I was saying to my son's girlfriend, I'm sad to say this, but candy makes me really happy. It's from my childhood.
Yeah,
and
me too.
I've been eating way more sweets during COVID. I've put on weight like everybody else. And it's not that candy is bad, but I can tell you that I don't do as well emotionally and mentally when my gut biome isn't happy and healthy. If I don't paddle, I don't do as well. Does that mean that I paddle all the time? No, but I'm very aware of the things that really work. And when we don't do them, we've got to find a way to have self-compassion.
Yes.
Yeah.
I agree.
Elizabeth, we're needing to wrap up. Can you tell us about any projects that you're working on, where people can find you? Tell us all about the good stuff.
All right. Well, so I have a therapy practice for people in Maryland. That's where I'm licensed, but I'm also just about to launch a coaching practice as well. So coaching midlife women to help them find that space in their life where they really feel at home in themselves. So that my website will go live, I'm hoping next week, but so whenever this podcast airs, it will probably be live. So that is ElizabethCushCoaching.com. It's a mouthful. So I'm excited to have that out in the world. What else? That's pretty much it for me. And then my podcast. So Woman Warriors is my podcast for women who worry, which I feel like is pretty much most of us. So womanwarriors.com. You can find the podcast there.
I love that. I want to ask if there's anything that we missed, but because our recording broke up, I'm kind of lost on time and I think we're over, but I can't tell. If you have a burning desire, then we could do that. If not, I think we need to wrap up, but I don't even know.
Yeah, no, I'm good. I think we covered a lot and yeah, it feels good.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being here today. I really enjoyed this conversation and I'm feeling much more excited about it now that we're over, which I don't think I've paid attention to before. So I will use my mindfulness practice to notice that moving forward.
There you go. There you go. Well, thank you so much for having me on the podcast, Patricia. I really appreciate the invitation and it was wonderful to talk to you today.
Yeah, you too. All right. I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hey again. I'm curious to know, what did you think? What are your thoughts about anxiety? And do HSPs have anxiety? I mean, the research says that if we have difficult childhoods, we have higher rates of anxiety and depression. We do have a more active insula. It's hard to know. I was thinking two things during the episode. I often talk to people about the physical sensations of anxiety and excitement can feel the same. So oftentimes before new things, I ask myself, am I anxious or am I excited? It's usually a little bit of both. And then with the anxiety, I was thinking during the interview that every time my kids leave to drive home, they live a few hours away from us. I always worry that they're not going to be able to get home safely or that they're not going to be able to get here safely. And I just have to know that Mama worries and they let me know when they get home and I know when they get here. And I just have to manage that. I care about the people that I love. So where does anxiety show up for you and how are you managing? If you want to join our closed Facebook group, it's called Unapologetically Sensitive. There are a couple questions to ask. It's an amazing, supportive community. Really feel blessed to have the people in it. If you're interested in joining my newsletter, you can go to my website at unapologeticallysensitive.com. The easiest way to get on the newsletter is to sign up for the 10 most downloaded episodes, and that will bring you to a place where you can sign up for the newsletter. If you're interested in merchandise, it says either Unapologetically Sensitive or Unapologetically Sensitive Podcast if you like that and you want to wear it loud and proud or loud and quiet. You can go to patriciayounglcsw.com. There's some amazing stuff that we have there. Everybody in my family has some merchandise, and I really love having this stuff to wear. If you want to get in touch with me, you can reach me at unapologeticallysensitive@gmail.com. Show notes can be found at unapologeticallysensitive.com. Go to the podcast page. I think that's all I have to say. I hope you are all doing well. I hope you are enjoying this springtime. And remember, sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. It's our superpower. Have a blessed day.